My family spent years making fun of me for being broke while they flaunted their money and success. At every family gathering, they'd remind me how I was the failure, the one who couldn't get it together. Then my grandpa died, and everything changed when his lawyer started reading the will. I'm going to tell you exactly what my grandpa left me, why he chose me over everyone else, and how my family reacted when they realized the person they'd been mocking for years was about to inherit everything. But first, let me paint you a picture of what family dinners were like. My family is obsessed with money. My Uncle Dave runs a car dealership and never shuts up about it. My Aunt Carol married a dentist and acts like she's royalty. My cousins all went to expensive colleges, got high-paying jobs, and love to brag about their salaries. Then there's me. I went to community college, worked as a barista, and lived in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. And if you're watching this thinking about your own family drama, go ahead and subscribe. Drop a like if you've ever been the black sheep. And comment below where you're watching from. I love hearing from you guys. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday party, I had to sit there and listen to them talk about their vacations, their new cars, their promotions. And they'd always find a way to bring up how I was struggling. My uncle would ask when I was going to get a real job. My aunt would make comments about how I should have studied something more practical. My cousins would laugh about how I was still making coffee for a living at 28. It hurt. Every single time. But I kept showing up because my grandpa was always there, and he was the only one who treated me like I mattered. He'd sit next to me at dinner, ask about my day, tell me stories about when he was young. He never made me feel less than. He never compared me to my cousins. He just loved me for who I was. My grandpa wasn't rich, or at least that's what everyone thought. He lived in a modest house, drove an old truck, and wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation. He'd worked as a mechanic his whole life, retired at 65, and lived off his pension and Social Security. Nobody in the family paid much attention to him. They'd visit on holidays, bring him generic gifts, and spend most of the time talking about themselves. But my grandpa and I were close. I'd visit him at least once a week. We'd sit on his porch, drink coffee, and talk about life. He'd tell me about his time in the military, about how he met my grandma, about the mistakes he made and the things he learned. He told me once that money doesn't make you successful, character does. I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time. My grandpa got sick about a year before he died. Cancer. He didn't tell anyone right away because he didn't want people fussing over him. I only found out because I showed up at his house one day and saw pill bottles on the counter. He made me promise not to tell the rest of the family yet. He said he'd tell them when he was ready. I spent even more time with him after that. I'd bring him groceries, help him around the house, sit with him during his bad days. The rest of the family didn't know he was sick for months. When he finally told them, they suddenly started visiting more. But it was obvious they were just checking in out of obligation. They'd stay for 20 minutes, ask if he needed anything, and leave. My Uncle Dave asked him once if he'd thought about selling his house. He said it in this casual way, like he was just making conversation. But I knew what he was really asking. He wanted to know what Grandpa was leaving behind. My grandpa just smiled and said he'd taken care of everything. My grandpa passed away on a Tuesday morning. I was there. He'd called me the night before and said he didn't think he had much time left. I drove over and sat with him. We didn't talk much. He just held my hand and told me he was proud of me. He said I reminded him of himself when he was young, that I had a good heart, and that I shouldn't let anyone make me feel small. Those were the last words he said to me. The funeral was the following weekend. The whole family showed up, all dressed in black, dabbing their eyes with tissues. My uncle gave a speech about how Grandpa was a hard-working man who loved his family. My aunt talked about childhood memories that I'm pretty sure she made up. My cousins stood around looking bored, checking their phones between condolences. I didn't give a speech. I couldn't. I just sat in the front row and cried. After the service, my uncle pulled me aside and asked if I knew anything about Grandpa's will. I said no. He nodded and said the lawyer would be reading it in a few days. He had this look in his eye, like he was already calculating what he'd get. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Thursday. Everyone showed up at the lawyer's office: my uncle, my aunt, my 3 cousins, and me. We sat in this conference room with dark wood furniture and leather chairs. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Peterson, sat at the head of the table with a folder in front of him. He started by offering his condolences and explaining how the process would work. Then he opened the folder and began reading. He started with small things. My grandpa left his fishing gear to one cousin, his tool collection to another, some old photos to my aunt. Everyone nodded politely, waiting for the real stuff. Then Mr. Peterson said, "As for the house and remaining assets, those are addressed separately." My uncle leaned forward. This was what he'd been waiting for. Mr. Peterson pulled out another document and started reading. "I leave my house, my savings, and all financial assets to my granddaughter." He said my name. The room went silent. My uncle's face went red. My aunt looked confused. My cousins stared at me like I'd just stolen something. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I'd just heard. Mr. Peterson continued reading. My grandpa had left me his house, which was paid off. He'd also left me his savings account, which had over $300,000 in it. $300,000. My uncle exploded. He stood up and started yelling, saying this had to be a mistake. He said there was no way Grandpa had that much money, and even if he did, there was no way he'd leave it all to me. Mr. Peterson calmly explained that the will was legally binding, properly executed, and there was no mistake. My aunt joined in, saying I must have manipulated Grandpa, that I'd taken advantage of an old man. My cousins sat there in shock, staring at me like I was a stranger. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I was still trying to process what was happening. Mr. Peterson pulled out a letter. He said my grandpa had left something for me to read, but also requested that it be read aloud to everyone present. My uncle told him not to, but Mr. Peterson ignored him and started reading. The letter explained everything. My grandpa wrote that he'd been saving money his entire life. He lived modestly because he didn't need much, but he'd invested wisely and built a comfortable nest egg. He said he'd watched his family over the years, seen how they treated money, how they treated each other, and how they treated me. He wrote that my uncle only cared about status, my aunt only cared about appearances, my cousins only cared about themselves, but I cared about people. I showed up. I spent time with him not because I wanted something, but because I loved him. He said I was the only one who visited him before he got sick, the only one who called just to check in, the only one who made him feel like he mattered. He wrote that he knew my family looked down on me, that they thought I was a failure because I didn't make a lot of money. But he said success wasn't about how much you earned. It was about who you were as a person. And in his eyes, I was the most successful person in the family. The letter ended with him saying he hoped this money would give me the freedom to live the life I wanted, without worrying about what others thought. He said he loved me, and he was proud of me. By the time Mr. Peterson finished reading, I was crying. My uncle was furious. He demanded to see the will, to verify it was real. Mr. Peterson handed him a copy. My uncle read through it, looking for any loophole, any mistake. There was none. My aunt tried a different approach. She said this wasn't fair, that Grandpa clearly wasn't thinking straight when he made this decision. Mr. Peterson shut that down immediately. He said he'd met with my grandpa multiple times over the past 2 years to draft and update the will. He said my grandpa was sharp, coherent, and very clear about his wishes. My cousins started whispering to each other. One of them asked if I'd known about this. I shook my head. I hadn't. I had no idea my grandpa had that much money, let alone that he was leaving it to me. Another cousin muttered something about how this was ridiculous, how I didn't deserve it. My uncle stood up and said he was going to contest the will. Mr. Peterson said he was welcome to try, but it would be a waste of time and money. The will was airtight. My grandpa had made sure of it. My uncle stormed out of the office. My aunt followed him, glaring at me on her way out. My cousins left without saying a word. I sat there alone with Mr. Peterson. He handed me the letter my grandpa had written. He said my grandpa had been very specific about wanting me to have it. He also gave me the keys to the house and the account information for the savings. He said if I had any questions, I could call him any time. I drove to my grandpa's house that night. I sat on the porch where we used to have coffee and just cried. I cried because I missed him. I cried because I couldn't believe what he'd done for me. I cried because for the first time in my life, I felt like someone had truly seen me. The next few weeks were a mess. My uncle tried to contest the will like he said he would. He hired a lawyer, claimed my grandpa wasn't of sound mind, and demanded the will be thrown out. It went nowhere. Mr. Peterson had documented everything. There were medical records proving my grandpa was mentally competent. There were witnesses who'd seen him sign the will. My uncle's case was dismissed within a month. My family stopped talking to me after that. My uncle sent me one angry email saying I'd torn the family apart. My aunt blocked me on social media. My cousins acted like I didn't exist. And honestly, I didn't care. These were people who'd spent years making me feel worthless. They didn't deserve a place in my life. I quit my job at the coffee shop a few months later. I used some of the money to pay off my student loans and buy a reliable car. I moved into my grandpa's house and fixed it up. It needed some work, but it felt like home. I enrolled in a program to finish my degree, something I'd always wanted to do but couldn't afford. I didn't blow the money on stupid stuff. I didn't buy a mansion or a fancy car or take some extravagant trip. I invested most of it, just like my grandpa would have wanted. I kept working, just part-time, because I liked staying busy. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't stressed about money. I wasn't worried about rent or bills or how I'd eat next week. I thought about my grandpa every day. I wished I could thank him, tell him how much this changed my life. But I think he already knew. He'd planned this for years, made sure I'd be taken care of, made sure my family couldn't take it away from me. He loved me in a way nobody else in my family ever did. About a year after he passed, my aunt reached out. She sent me a message saying she wanted to talk, that maybe we could move past everything. I didn't respond. A few months after that, one of my cousins called and asked if I could loan them money. I hung up. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I had. My uncle never reached out. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was still bitter about the whole thing, still convinced I'd manipulated my grandpa. Let him think that. I know the truth. My grandpa left me everything because I was the only one who loved him for who he was, not what he had. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty about getting the inheritance. I don't. Not even a little. I earned it by being a decent human being, by showing up, by caring. My family had the same opportunity. They could have spent time with him. They could have called him, visited him, made him feel loved. But they didn't. They were too busy with their own lives, too focused on themselves. My grandpa taught me that wealth isn't just about money. It's about relationships, kindness, and integrity. My family had money, but they were poor in the ways that mattered. I didn't have money, but I was rich in the things my grandpa valued. And in the end, that's what counted. The lawyer read my grandpa's real will, and my family realized the person they'd mocked for years had inherited everything. They were furious. They felt cheated. But they only had themselves to blame. My grandpa saw who they really were, and he made his choice. I'm living the life my grandpa wanted for me now. I'm happy, stable, and surrounded by people who actually care about me. My family can stay bitter if they want. I'm done caring what they think.